Grüß, willkommen in einem freagens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 17, part 2 of my organisational series covering the German Army or German battalions. Viewers should watch part 1 first. In this video I'll provide a view of the German World War II brigades and divisional combat strengths and how they changed during the duration of the war. After the German summer offensives, the Russians launched Operation Uranus and Saturn in November 1942. In the east, the infantry divisions were continuing to experience long-term manpower issues. While additionally infantry support weapons assisted, it could not fully overcome the reduction of manpower. The two-battalion regiment was becoming the norm for Russia by certainly late 1942, although at the present moment not in the west and other locations outside of Russia. When we look at the combat strength chart or table, the infantry battalions had lower manpower, which did have an impact on their combat strength. This was the case even for divisions which adopted the two-battalion regiment. Let's now look at the motorised infantry division. The only change, at least for the 16th motorised division, was the enhancement of the engineer battalion. When we look at this chart, we can see the engineers were beefed up a lot in terms of combat strength points. Moving over to the Panzer divisions, the 11th Panzer Division was involved in the German attempt to relieve Stalingrad and later the counterattack at Kharkov. During this campaign, the Panzer divisions were not full strength and some formations were disbanded and distributed to the Panzer Grenadiers, so it was a rather weak Panzer division, particularly in this case. On the upside, the Engineer Battalion and Anti-Tank Battalion was stronger for this Panzer Division. The Motorcycle Battalion had disappeared. In this division, the Artillery Regiment was also stronger. The Panzer Grenadier Regiment consisted of one battalion equipped with half-tracks, SDKZ 251 APCs. The Panzer regiments were overall weaker, but this was primarily due to combat losses, basically the old manpower issue. Back in Africa, the Tunisia campaign was continuing. The Allies finally pushed the Axis out of Africa by May 1943. In 1943, the infantry divisions were formally reorganised, with the reconnaissance battalion being replaced with a Fusilier battalion. In Russia, the two-battalion regiments was standard. In other theatres, the infantry divisions could have 3 or 2 infantry battalion per regiments, depending on when the divisions were formed and how much action they'd seen. When we look at the combat strength charts, there was no major changes in combat strength, although the reconnaissance battalion was now replaced with the Fusilier battalion, which had the same strength. At an infantry regimental level, the number of battalions were reduced in this case. The 10th Panzer Division was a Panzer Division quickly sent to Tunisia. It was organised using a standard structure when it arrived. By 1943, a number of unofficial changes had become official in terms of the Panzer divisions, such as the lack of a motorcycle battalion. The division-level formations were standard for the period, with the Panzer Regiment being powerful due to it being at full strength. After the Allies took Africa, they then invaded Sicily in July 1943. Once Sicily had been secured, the Allies then officially opened the second front by invading the Italian mainland. Italy surrendered, and while some northern Italian divisions were organised and fought on the German side, the war was over for Italy. In Italy, the infantry divisions retained their full theoretical old structure strength, although even for these divisions, the reconnaissance battalion was replaced with a Fusilier battalion. The engineers also began to receive additional weapons, specifically anti-tank mines and other weapons of the sort, increasing their strength. The divisions in the west often used the older 3-battalion regimental structure. If an infantry division used a 3-battalion structure at the start of 1943, it probably would retain it until losses caused it to revert to a 2-battalion structure. In mid-1943, the motorised infantry divisions were converted into Panzer Grenadier divisions. This mainly resulted in divisions getting tank destroyers and assault guns. Unofficially, they often had panzer battalions attached, especially in Italy. The Germans did send a lot of Panzer Grenadier divisions to Italy. The infantry regiments were beefed up, while the motorcycle battalion and one artillery battalion, on the other hand, was lost. In this Panzergrenadier division, a Panzer battalion was attached, but this was not the standard arrangement. The anti-tank battalion gained tank destroyers, which dramatically increased its strength and gave this division an armoured formation. The anti-aircraft gun was deployed in a separate battalion in this new structure. Swinging back to Russia, the Russian Donetsk campaign was checked by the Germans and the front settled down, at least for a short period of time. In June 1943, the Germans launched their summer offensive, which failed to break through. While the 167th Infantry Division was a full-strength division, it was very rare for a 3-battalion regiment to be present in Russia at this time. When we look at the battalion strength chart, there's no changes to the battalion strengths. This shows a 3-battalion regiment division. Most divisions had adopted the 2-battalion regiment structure by this time, particularly in the Eastern Front. The Grossdeutschland division was not a normal Panzergrenadier division and was a very well-equipped elite formation. This structure was used at Kursk during the German offensive. This was a very powerful division. The biggest difference between this formation and a normal Panzergrenadier division was the addition of a Panzer regiment as well as an attached Panther battalion. The reason why I'm showing this is that this was the first use of the Panther tank. As this is an unusual division, I'm not going to compare it with any other Panzergrenadier divisions or Panzer divisions, but it did contain a lot of interesting weapons. The Tiger battalion was so weak because so few tanks were in the battalion. The Panther battalions were very strong because so many tanks were placed in each battalion. After the unsuccessful German summer offensive, the Russians launched their summer offensive. When the Germans deployed new divisions in the east, that is mainly moved it from the west to the east, or prepared for offensives, the infantry divisions could reach their theoretical full strength. This is why this division, the 7th Infantry Division, is a 3-battalion or uses a 3-battalion structure. At least for the 7th Infantry Division, there was no formal changes to the structure compared with the previous structure shown. This table shows a typical full-strength Panzergrenadier division of the second half of 1943. The only armour in such a division was the Marder tank destroyers and Stug assault guns, although it was rare for a division to have both a tank destroyer and assault gun battalion, at least initially. This Panzergrenadier division, or the standard Panzergrenadier division, had a Stug battalion as its primary armour formation, but it was generally unchanged from the previous standard Panzergrenadier divisional structure, all strengths. While there is a lot of popular focus on the Tiger, Panthers and Elephants, the standard Panzer division was equipped with Panzer IVs, which were still very highly effective. This chart probably shows the closest to a standard Panzer division for the period. Tank strengths fluctuated wildly. For this period, the Panzer Division's support and Panzer engineers were beefed up in strength. The anti-tank battalions had been replaced with a Tiger destroyer or a tank destroyer battalion. The self-propelled howitzer battalion was becoming more and more standard. A SDK of said 251 equipped battalion was becoming standard in the Panzergrenadier regiments. At this time, the standard medium tank was the Panzer IV with a long barrel 7.5 cm gun. Starting in December 1943, the Russians launched a series of offensives designed to clear the Ukraine of German forces. In addition to this, up north the Russians launched an offensive towards the Baltic states. Over in Italy, the Allies launched a series of offensives which resulted in Rome being taken in June 1944. During 1944, the number of infantry regiments, which contained 3 battalions, continued to drop. In the west, the battalions were often full strength, but could be manned by new troops. The equipment mix could also often be variable, with many divisions using previously captured weapons. For the most part, the standard infantry division was still a formidable formation. When we look at the strengths, the 2-battalion regiment was standard. Additional new weapons such as the SG-44, RPGs and ATRLs assisted in boosting the strength of the infantry battalions. The Hermann Göring Motorised Parachute Division was an unusual elite formation. It was a pure motorised infantry division, as it lacked much armour at all. The main difference with other Panzergrenadier divisions was the high combat strength of the infantry battalions. This was a powerful battalion structure. By January 1944, most Panzer divisions had received at least one battalion of Panthers and a number of self-propelled weapons such as SPAAs, assault guns and other supporting equipment. Some divisions had been organised in this manner in late 43, but by 1944 it was becoming very standard indeed. The Panzer divisions were changing into a very complex structure with a number of highly specialised formations. While the battalions stayed together, they were often mixed up with other battalions and supporting formations to meet specific objectives. Up to 3 powerful Kampfgruppens could be formed if the division was up to full strength. But what was very unusual here was that within the battalion area, a lot of organic support equipment was included that would normally not be, or at least wasn't in the past. There was no change at the divisional level. It should be noted the anti-aircraft battalion does contain self-propelled anti-aircraft weapons. The artillery regiments remained the same. The Panzergrenadiers were beefed up a lot, especially the motorised battalion. One battalion was mounted in SDKZ 251s, the half-track, and was considered armoured, but its strength was similar to the non-armoured motorised battalions due to it having lower manpower. By January 1944, most Panzer divisions were equipped with one battalion of Panthers, which was a very powerful battalion. In June 1944, the Germans had to meet the initial landings or Allied landings in France. Over in Italy, the Allies were continuing their advance up the Shoe of Italy. There was a lot of variation in the structure of the infantry division depending on its location. This shows an infantry division on the Western Front, specifically the 352nd Infantry Division. While there was no actual major structural changes in the infantry division compared with previous structure, a number of minor localised changes were present, particularly in the Western Front. This shows a standard Panzergrenadier division up to the reorganisation in September 1944. It differed little from the early 1944 structure. By 1944, the anti-tank battalion was primarily equipped with tank destroyers and represented one of the 2 armoured formations in this division. The assault gun battalion was made up of Stug 3s, which represented the 2nd armoured formation. The increased use of half-tracks increased the strength of the Panzergrenadier infantry battalion, although no battalion was ever exclusively equipped with half-tracks as you saw in the Panzer divisions. In mid-1944, the Panzer division structure had reached its peak with advanced weapons and reasonable manpower levels. Starting in June 1944, they were to meet their greatest challenge. There was no major changes to the Panzer division structure. Some new equipment was arriving, especially at the infantry level, such as SG-44s, RPGs and ATRLs, although it was not until later in the year the Germans finally worked out how to deploy and use their anti-tank rocket launchers successfully. Looking at the structure and strength chart, there was no major changes visible to the Panzer division for this period. While the Germans managed to keep the Allies at bay for a while in France, the Allies finally broke through and the Germans suffered significant equipment losses in the West. After withdrawing from France, the Germans launched their final offensive in the West, which did make some initial headway, but once the weather cleared and Allied air power came into the picture, it was doomed. Over in the east, the Russians had managed to retake almost the entire Ukraine, as well as most of the Baltic states up north. But the biggest disaster was the Russian Operation Bagration, which managed to destroy most of Army Group Center. To cap everything off, while Army Group Center was being destroyed, the Russians broke through in the south and advanced deep into the Balkans. After the disasters in mid-1944, the Germans instigated a major reform of the infantry divisions. The new, later 44 infantry divisions represented a major change. After the heavy losses in July-August, the Germans formed emergency divisions which lacked most of the support formations of a typical infantry division. While adequate for defence, it was less adequate for offensive operation. This began to resemble the Russian emergency divisions raised in 1941. The new smaller emergency infantry divisions bundled all support formations in smaller numbers in a single support formation. The artillery regiment strength was reduced, but the infantry remained much the same. There was also a Type 2 emergency infantry division, with even less heavy weapons, but with more infantry. The infantry in these divisions tended to be of very poor quality. The artillery was reduced to a single battalion. Interestingly enough, the infantry regiments used the 3-battalion structure, which I find very unusual. The Volksgrenadier divisions were a special type of infantry division raised in late 1944. Most new divisions raised were of the weaker emergency type, but the Volksgrenadier divisions could be highly effective in offensive operation, as well as in the defence. There were a few regular infantry divisions which were close to full strength at this point, so these divisions probably represented the best infantry divisions Germany could field in late 1944. Compared with a standard infantry division, the support formations were weakened and some were centralised in the divisional support formation. The artillery was also weakened, but the infantry remained much the same. In this case, we are using the 2-battalion infantry regiment structure. After the heavy losses in June to August, the Germans had to reorganise their panzer divisions again. The overall panzer division structure remained, but the individual battalions were greatly weakened. As we can see from this chart, the divisional support formations stayed or remained, but many were weakened. The artillery regiment was strengthened, which was an upside, but the panzer grenadier battalions were reduced in strength. The biggest change was the reduction in strength of the panzer battalions. The SS panzer divisions have been included for completeness. The SS panzer divisions in this period were lavishly equipped and kept up to strength. The SS panzer division support was identical to a standard panzer division, but included, in addition, an assault gun battalion and an self-propelled rocket battalion. The armoured Panzer Grenadier battalion contained additional support equipment, but otherwise the Panzer Grenadiers were the same as the standard Panzer division, as well as the Panzer Regiment. In 1945, the Germans were on the defensive everywhere. Let's start with Italy. Then we move over to France and Germany itself for more Allied offensives. On the Eastern Front, the Russians were driving deep into Germany. Finally, the Russians took Berlin in May 1945 and the war came to an end shortly afterwards. The Panzer 45 structure was never implemented, but does show what the Germans were thinking. This Panzer division was significantly weaker, having only one Panther battalion. It was probably a good combined arms formation, but was also affected by a reduction in the quality of German troops and began to resemble a Russian tank corps. I suspect this was done to reduce the reliance on the Kampfgruppen tactic, which the new troops were less able to implement. The obvious change was the mixing of the Panzer Battalion and Panzer Grenadier battalions. The remaining regiment could have the armoured car battalion attached to it to give you a second Kampfgruppen. While the number of tanks in each battalion was down, the improved quality of the tanks made up for it in terms of combat strength. Let's now look at how the divisions changed during the war. I'll only be looking at the standard infantry divisions and Panzer divisions for this exercise. This chart shows all the German infantry division structures and battalion strengths in the first half of the war. While there was a constant minor changes occurring, the basics remained much the same. The infantry battalion ranged in strength from 2 to 3, and most of the battalions did not change very much at all. In the second chart, this covers the latter period of the war, and we see more changes, although these only became obvious in late 1944 when the Germans raised emergency and Volksgrenadier divisions. The infantry battalions contained or remained constant in strength, although in reality manpower was dropping, but this was kept up to strength by the addition of new, more advanced weapon systems. Let's now look at the Panzer divisions. For simplicity, I'm not including the Panzer division sent to the desert and any special Panzer divisions such as the SS. We will start with the divisional level formations and artillery regiments. What we see here for the first half of the war was reasonable level of stability. The artillery regiment stayed consistent up to the adoption of the self-propelled howitzers. The motorcycle battalion was eventually removed. By the midpoint of the war, the armoured car battalion was significantly beefed up. The anti-tank battalion constantly grew in strength due to new equipment until the tank destroyers were being supplied. The anti-aircraft battalion came and went for some reason. In the second half of the war, the structure remained much the same. Even the 1945 structure at this level was comparatively similar. Let's now look at the Panzergrenadier regiments for the first half of the war. The regimental support formations did vary a lot, but the battalions were generally stable, growing in strength before dropping again due to manpower issues. The Panzer battalions slowly grew as the tanks were being upgraded. In the second half of the war, the Panzergrenadiers remained stable, although if the 1945 division was implemented, they would have experienced a significant drop in combat strength. The Panzer battalions continued to grow, but when the number of tanks in the battalion dropped, they reduced in terms of combat strength, but still remained reasonably powerful. And so we come to the end of this rather long video and episode 17 of my video series on organisation, in this case analysing the German army in World War II, specifically the estimated combat strengths of the battalions which made up the divisions. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.